Hello. I've been thinking a lot about this stuff about it's going on right now, of course. You know what I've come to a conclusion. Of course, anybody that's intelligent enough can figure it out. Of course, yes. And that is Russia or any other superpower. They are not a natural country. They are not a natural formation. Put it that way. All right. They are an artificial kind of. They were made in an art more. They were simply created by one people, one nation, taking more of the land, taking more land around them simply by force. All right. They were created this way. They were first only a much smaller country, all right, once long ago. And then it started expanding towards south and east and west. So they were not always this that we know, like we know them today, all right. They were not so big. They were nowhere near as big. That's one thing. Russia is not a natural country, all right, because it's so vast and it contains so many different ethnicities, and so it's not a natural formation, as I said. All right, it's an well, you can even say a conglomerate of different tribes, nationalities, and territories. So it has always been like that, and that's why it was so easy for them to, for the Soviet Union to be created, after First World War. So because the Russians already had control over all these other, territories that are today independent countries, but were not always really countries in that respect. They were not really states in real sense of word, right? So, but you must remember one thing: Russia would have never existed as it is today, as a country, as a state. And this is a little ironic, but it's true. It would have actually, who knows when it would have been, become even a power, much less a superpower, if there wasn't actually, for one thing, the Vikings from Sweden. Rurik, he founded the first state, first real state over there. All right. So before that, it was just a gathering of Slavic tribes, right? They were living there, but they were not organized. Far from that, they were like barbarians and stuff. And let me tell you, before anybody accuses me of anything, that I consider myself Slavic as well, and my name means Slav, a Slav. So, but that's the truth. I didn't like it also first time I read about it. But that's the truth. Also in Ukraine, you had the same thing where these Vikings came. They were actually first driven out, right, by the Slavs, but then they were invited back, actually, which is the most, bizarre thing. Because I guess those people realize, we need some kind of a government, and we are vulnerable to an invasion because we are not so well organized and stuff like that. So they invited the Vikings so they could create some sort of, a state, simple as that, a kingdom for them. So that's what they did, and their rulers were for a long time descended from this dynasty that came from, well, from Sweden, obviously. And the same thing, as I said, happened in Ukraine. And so, yeah, that's one thing. That's a little bit about the history. Actually, the center of that first Rus state, as it was called, because actually the name Rus, where the name Russia comes from, was something that the Slavs, it wasn't a name for the Slavic population, it was what they called Vikings, because Rus means yellow headed, right? Blonde hair. It means you had light or fair hair if you are Rus, right? We have the same kind of expression where I come from, Bastian. Well, anyway, so yeah, the Vikings were there for a long time, even though their blood, of course, was thinned out eventually as they intermarried to Slavic women, and these rulers had children with them. But it wasn't until actually the 17th century that the first like real Slavic dynasty in like which was in everything like Russian, right, Slavic, that it came to rule, and that was the Roman dynasty, right? The second and last one. But actually, between the 800s and the 17 or 1600s, let's put it that way, it was all actually one dynasty, the Rurikid dynasty, right? So even Grozny was a part of that dynasty. He was like the first Tsar that really kind of made Russia big and expanded its borders and all that. So anyway, what I was gonna say is that the center of this whole Russian kingdom, the first one was not Moscow; it was Kiev, actually, which is of course the capital of Ukraine today. So then you will say, well, then how did that uh, city become the capital of Ukraine, not Russia? And why is it not called Russia but Ukraine? Well, actually, it wasn't always called Ukraine, that part. It actually also went by the name of Little Russia before. So, yeah. But the thing was, it was all, well, Ukraine, Belarus, and the European part of Russia, and it was all one state, one kingdom, and that's Kiev and Rus. That's the official name, right? But then when the Mongols came, they conquered that part, and they pretty much divided these parts amongst themselves. I guess their rulers, one was the ruler of this part, which today is called Russia. The other one was in Ukraine, and the third one, I guess, was in Belarus. So that's how it. After that, I don't know why it stayed, but it did stay divided because also you had in the West there was a Polish-Lithuanian Commonwealth, which took Belarus and large part of Ukraine, the western part, or most of it actually. I think they held most of it for a long time, not the easternmost part. That one was like dominated by Moscow. All right, so all right, one interesting, very unique event in Ukrainian history, which happened in 1681, was when there was this leader. It's called the title of the Cossack, commander, which was the highest title you could have in Ukraine back then, like practically the ruler of the country. It's called ataman or hetman, also. So there was one guy by the name of Petro Doroshenko. So he was a guy who was really, worried about Ukraine because before that, Ukraine was actually liberated from Polish-Lithuanian rule by another great, probably the greatest figure ever, Bogdan Khmelnytsky, and he was also an ataman as well, of course. But after that, he kind of was forced to make some sort of alliance with the Russian Tsar, because he did defeat the Polish Lithuanians, but after that he experienced various problems because he had allied himself with the Tatars, right, to defeat the Polish Lithuanian army because they were had a bigger army and he didn't have enough soldiers. So he knew that he had to make an alliance with somebody else who had something against Polish Lithuania, right? Commonwealth. Because Tatars did have interests there, they were in Crimea, I would call it, and so that was not a part actually of the Ukrainian, how to say, the independent state in the 1600s. That was a part of it was a Khanate, right? Because it means the Khan is the ruler. It's something that they inherited from the Mongols because the Tatars came there. They were not the same thing as Mongols necessarily. They are related, but not the same. But they did come to those countries with the Mongol invasion, right? So enough about that part. Yeah. So as I said in 1681, I believe, uh, it happened that this guy, Petro Poroshenko, he saw that there were again great, how you say, uh, the Russian Tsar had pretensions, right, to take Ukraine. So now it's because of what Khmelnytsky was forced to like enter an alliance with him because he didn't want to do that with the Polish Ukrainians. So yeah, I mean Ukraine was under a strong influence by Russia then. So yeah, and this guy Doroshenko didn't like it. He wanted to do something about it. He didn't want to Ukraine to fall under Russian rule again, uh, because they hadn't been, part of the same, you know, state for a long time. For so an independent Ukrainian national identity was formed in that time, But you might say it always existed because even though they are all mostly Slavic people, uh, they never were quite the same. I mean, completely the same in every regard. I mean, in the other hand, in Russia you had a lot of Finnish tribes living, and even today, many Russians in the north have their genes. They are not really Slavic or not fully anyway. Well, in Ukraine, you had other tribes, but that's another story. You had certain Iranian tribes actually there as well in southern Russia. But back to Doroshenko again. What he did to try to prevent Ukraine from falling under Russian control or, Russian rule was something that was really unique. Nobody else has done it before. And what he did was to go to the Ottomans, the Sultan, and ask for help against the Russians, because there was this other fraction. There was another, he wasn't the only Ottoman, actually. There was another guy, and his name was, I believe, Romodanovsky. Yeah, something like that. Igor, I believe. Well, anyway, he was pro-Russian because I guess he was from East Ukraine, which was always, more, inclined towards Russia. But anyway, Petro, he sought the aid of the Ottomans, and in return, he had to accept the Sultan as his, how to say, superior, his ruler, and he did that. All right. So what happened? Actually, they that created this sort of it's kind of started really a series of wars between the Ottomans and Russians, in which ended badly for the Ottomans. But at first, they were successful in kind of you know supporting Doroshenko, who actually didn't. He wasn't the ruler. He wasn't the main ruler, but he installed a son of Khmelnytsky as the main ruler. I believe it was the son. Yeah, Yuri, his name was. And yeah, the Ottomans recognized him. He was but only in the West Ukraine. They weren't able to capture the East because, the Russians were there and these other Ukrainians. So this was a really, but you might argue he wasn't the first one to ally himself with these with another completely another kind of people, like, because I mean these guys were, you know for first thing, they were Muslims. They were not Christians like Ukrainians, and Russians. They were, but and the other thing was that they were, you know like, considered the enemies because they came with the Mongols and stuff. Not the Turks, but the Tatars from the Crimea. But they were all kind of related. Well, anyway, to make this a long story short, uh, it kind of what happened. It failed in the end. The Russians kind of eventually did gain control over Ukraine, but they never really managed to, totally like subjugate. I mean, people are still, many of them, feeling like Ukrainians, not like Russians. So, and this is what we see today, the results of that. So, yeah, it's a really complicated story. Yeah, history, but yeah, I mean, Ukraine has always struggled to stay independent, and unlike their northern neighbor Belarus or Belarusia, um, I don't know really why, but they never really had such aspirations. They were more kind of felt more perhaps like Russians or West Russians, something like that. So, but Ukrainians were very like pro-independent, pro-independence. Even in the Second World War, actually, you had certain factions there which actually fought against the Red Army in the Second World War. So that's why you have certain stories of Ukrainians cooperating with the Germans, and yeah, that was a lot of nonsense going on. So that would be that history lesson. I mean, yeah, I mean it will always be like that, and I hope that Ukraine will manage to maintain their independence. So unfortunately, they have to fight for it once again. They have to fight for it right now as I speak. So, but yeah, I mean, to those people who say, "Oh, it's all the same," well, I mean, come on, you had countries like Germany and Austria, like people speak the same language. They are basically the same people, but You don't say like why is Austria independent? Why are they not with Germany? Because there is a reason, right? There are simple there are both certain cultural differences and historical differences that sometimes divide like people. All right. So same thing goes it goes for my people, right? In former Yugoslavia, we weren't always. I mean, we didn't all have the same. Let's put it this way: our history developed very differently from country to country, from people to people. So that's why today it's kind of impossible to just, that's why Yugoslavia in the end didn't work. I mean, it fell apart because of that mainly. And of course, because of the rise of the nationalism. But that was inevitable. It had to happen sooner or later because, once, that whole kind of motto, we are all the same, we should all be together in one country, did not really work because of certain economical differences as well as political and, cultural. It had to go that way. So that's the same thing here with Ukraine and Russia. It's the same thing. They are not the same people, simple as that. I mean, they are similar. They have some similarities, but they also have differences. They have, you cannot say, oh, they should all be one country because they are the same people. That's only what it looks like superficially. But once you go deeper, you see there are reasons why Ukraine is an independent country, and Belarus is also an independent country. So there are reasons, simple as that. Would it have been better? Yeah, maybe. There wouldn't have been a war now if it was one country. Of course, in that respect, it would have been better. But I don't know. Really, it's a tough. Yeah, it's simply. I don't know. It's a conundrum. It's a tough thing to chew on. But anyway, I think I said enough now. Yeah, and now I hope I've given you, who didn't know so much about the history of this, both Russia and Ukraine, I hope I've given you, a better insight. So take care, and I'll see you. Bye bye. Have a nice day.